Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Extra Shift. I'm Chris here as always with Brendan. How are we doing?
Good. Yeah. It's good to see each other again after busy Christmas and New Year's and everything.
We made the prediction, obviously, that we would definitely not take as long as we did last time to do a podcast, which was longer. So
Yeah, that's
it's
that's
going
always
going
the
well.
way. Yeah,
It's been a very busy time.
it's been a tricky season so far in that regard, but it's probably going to get a little trickier because I'm going to be overseas for the next 4 weeks. So, but we'll work something out. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's episode 217, and
Now,
we've pretty much hit just past the halfway point for the season.
yep, as you've sort of alluded to in your screen name, as the poet laureate of the world once, John Bon Jovi once said, "Whoa, we're
That's
halfway
right.
there. Whoa, we've got halfway to go." That's how this works, right?
Yeah.
No, look, I think we are at the halfway point of the season, which normally means you can make some bold statements about what's happening in the league. I still don't necessarily believe we 100% can because this season just feels bizarre, but. I think there are some teams where you know what they are, and I think there are some teams where we really still don't know what we've got, and we're halfway through a season. So I think we're going to talk about a few of those, and we're going to talk about a few predictions in particular because I made a few predictions that I'm really happy with. We're going to ignore the ones I'm not, but I made a few predictions I'm really happy with so far. Also, just for people who are watching the stream, I would like everyone to pay attention to my inflatable Dalek, which I blew up the other day, and I want you to pay attention to it because there is a slow leak in it somewhere. So just watch as the podcast goes how much the Dalek goes down. If you're watching, if you're not watching, this is a pointless segment to you. But anyway, so it is 217 as you mentioned, and we like, we always go back through the players again, and I think there's some big names. There are some massive names that we've got to talk to. Obviously, Bruce Boudreau as a Leaf for 1 year. 1 year's worth of Boudreau. I often look for the San Jose Sharks legend. Not really in this one. There's not really what I would call a San Jose Sharks legend jumping out at me in this list. Although we've got some great names, including Inge Hammerstrom, which just sounds like a metal guitarist from Finland.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's
Inge Hammerstrom.
Hammerstrom.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. There's no other notable. Why? Who cares about 17s? There's nobody.
Although there is a 17 who we're going to be talking about soon in a trade on their new team is wearing 17.
We will be. Yeah. And I just love saying there's nobody who's a 17 because I just love the idea of the Oilers fans coming with pitchforks ready to kill me. and obviously noted Atlanta Thrasher Ilya Kovalchuk, but definitely like the Yarra fans and Milan Lucic fans are just ready to riot. And that makes me happy. That makes me incredibly happy. There are a number of
the small things that we enjoy.
Well, it is. It's the small things that make me feel great about myself. What I love too is there are a lot of players who had 17 for a very long time. There are actually a lot of them. Again, Wayne Simmons had 17 in Philly. There are a lot of them. But it's so much more fun to say that nobody uses that number and it's absolutely pointless. And again, Yarakiri, what did he ever do? What did he ever do? He didn't do anything in this damn league. Let's go with the trades that have happened. Yeah. So we have a trade to announce. I think you're going to want to hear it. I certainly was because the Colorado Avalanche acquired Mackenzie Blackwood, Giovanni Smith, and a 2027 fifth from the Sharks for Alexander Georgiev, Nikolai Kovalenko, and a 2026 second and a 2025 fifth. So this trade was really good. Very happy with it. We did say we would send Mackenzie Blackwood to a contender at some point this year. We did. I think it's a great landing spot for Blackwood because that's a net that was definitely unclaimed, even while Georgia was in it.
Been a pretty questionable kind of starting role in Colorado for a few years now. Even the year that they won,
it was kind of like, and then obviously they go, oh, that goalie's going to go out and get a lot of money in free agency, and that went well. But Georgiev didn't claim the net while he was there, so you can't really say that Georgiev was claiming the net, no. Now. The move for Georgiev is literally just to balance up the goalie books so that you give one, you get one. He's played a few games in San Jose. Remember, the big plan in San Jose is to make sure that they protect Askarov a bit, give him some games, let him play. And when he's played, by the way, he's been great. Let Askarov play, but also have the ability to then shield Askarov and play.
It's long-term planning for Askarov. It's not, it's not about him performing now. It's not about, trying to come in and be a starter in the NHL now.
And look, for me, the big thing with the Sharks, and I've said this now every podcast we've done, there's forward planning happening. There's forward planning taking place. And I like that. I like the fact you've actually got some forward planning happening. I like the fact that you've got thinking going on, because there was no thought for a very long time in San Jose. So I'm pleased with the way we're developing.
Yeah. So what did you think of the I guess the pieces of the biggest piece realistically of that return is the second, which is probably and it's a 2026 second of Colorado. It's not going to be a significant player or anything like that. But
we're going to be a significant player though this year. Colorado, no. Look, while they're not brilliant, they're not going to be picking in the bottom end. So it's kind of like San Jose's kind of kick the can down the line and see what comes of it. That's sort of the plan you've got here. And I think
realistically though, I think the reality that we have to accept is that there generally isn't big returns for goalies, especially goalies with term, especially, there's just not that many roles for goalies that there's a big market for it. I can't imagine anyone else was knocking down San Jose's door for Mackenzie Blackwood and offering him a first or anything. It just wasn't going to happen.
No, exactly. I think Mackenzie Blackwood, look, we as I said, we were going to give him a chance to go somewhere and contend. And he's done amazing work for us. What the return is, the return is that we did a solid for a player who gave us some good service in really bad times. And that's going to pay off, I think, down the line as well, because what you're looking at with the Sharks is this idea that they could still bring in some players while they're in the middle of this rebuild. And at the same time, if it works and the rebuild starts to go really well, they might stick around. But if it's still going to be a little bit away, players know the Sharks are going to do them a solid and get them down the line. That's why I think there are a few players that I think will be coming up end of this year, I think, contract-wise, and there's a few other players that are around at trade bait at the moment that I look at and think to myself, the Sharks could very much be in on that, not because they're going to help now, but because it gives the Sharks some trade leverage down the line and gives the player a chance for... Look, I don't mind if players want to use San Jose as a conditioning stint. If we're going to get resources back for them, there's been a lot of crap going around about where's Jonathan Tays going to end up, for example. And the Sharks have been mentioned. We don't need him. It's not going to suit him. I think he wants to come back and win.
I think he wants to be the veteran on a
But if he decides that he wants to come back and do a conditioning stint for half a year and be ready for a full season, then there are worse things the Sharks could do than go, well, we'll take you on for a 2-year deal with a guarantee of we're moving you at the end, and we'll give you the no move condition so you can pick.
Or the very likelihood that he could get moved to, that's exactly the kind of rental that people pay a third for at the deadline.
100%. And that's, as I said, what the Sharks have done quite nicely is they're not rushing this. And one last thing, and I know there were people going, move on from the Sharks, and I will. But the last thing I want to sort of just mention here is I was mentioning this to my brother yesterday, who will be listening to this later on when I start bagging out the New York Rangers. But we were talking about that, and I said, I think the big difference between what Chicago did with Bedard and what San Jose have done with Celebrini is Chicago put Bedard on the team and then went out and got a bunch of grizzled veterans to support him and give him help. But they don't necessarily play at the pace and the tempo and the style that Bedard plays at. So it slows Bedard down a little bit. Whereas what the Sharks decided to do was, we're just going to throw the kids out there. We're going to protect them, but we're going to throw them out there with no pressure and go, just run around and learn, right? Just go and learn together. And so you've got Smith and you've got Celebrini, obviously, and then you go up and down the lineup, and all of the young ones we've got, Wallman's come into his own in the defensive side. The way they're developing is what you want to see. And they're not having to slow down because they've got like a 35-year-old who can't keep up with the passing. So
yeah,
I think that's what they've done well.
Of veterans who are just lugging it around and killing 20 minutes a night.
Exactly. Let's get into a couple of other moves now. Both of these ones are going to be
quickly before we do that, though. I think the other thing I want to mention on Blackwood, though, is that they did it's a bit of an interesting trend I've found, especially with goalies, of teams trading for a goalie and then immediately extending them long term before they've even really had a chance to play for the team. Blackwood extension, I think, came like a week or two after the trade. I think maybe he played like 1 or 2 games for Colorado at that point in time. They're like, yeah, we've seen everything we need to see. We're going to sign you for 5 years at $5.25 million, which is interesting. I'm not sure how much pressure there was on them to get that deal done immediately.
I don't hate it. Like, that's the thing. Here's the thing. I don't hate it. I've seen what Blackwood's done when he's had a run in San Jose. And I think the thing for Mackenzie Blackwood in going to in being at the Sharks, and the reason why he didn't immediately try to like get the hell out of town, is Mackenzie Blackwood needed to prove that he could do a sustained job in net. Like, he was always the backup to someone else, or injury.
In New Jersey.
When he was in New Jersey, it was like, oh, this will be Mackenzie Blackwood's net. And it was never Mackenzie Blackwood's net. It was never his net. What he needed to prove in San Jose was he could do that. And by standing on his head with a almost legendarily bad Sharks team, what he did was prove he could be that sustained starter. Now, that was never the plan going forward this year, and everybody knew that wasn't the plan this year. I think for Colorado, they look at what happened with Blackwood and San Jose and go, well, we're better than that. And if he can give them that level of goaltending with, there goes the Dalek, by the way.
There we go.
And for people who are like, for people who are like worried about what he's going to be in Colorado and why Colorado might have, is that a bad deal for Colorado? Colorado go our defensive core is better. For a start, I mean, one defenseman makes the defensive core better.
I don't necessarily think it's a terrible deal or anything. I just wonder why it needed to get done immediately. Like, I guess that there was a concern that he would make it to the end of the year and ask for more or something. I just wonder who else was lining up to give Mackenzie Blackwood 5.
I think there were. Look, I think, and you know this, I think that the goalie market at the end of this year will probably go a bit crazy again. Because I think there are a lot of teams that don't feel like they've got their starter and they're just making do with what's there. And I think there are also teams that have had some success with guys who have been around for a bit who haven't been seen as starters. Anthony Stollart's come on down. And teams have gone, well, maybe we can get him. And maybe we can get him. And I think there was probably a lot of chatter around Mackenzie Blackwood. And I think that Blackwood would have been very popular for a team on the wildcard bubble or a team who thinks they could make that little push. Also, the other thing is too, I wonder if it was basically the 5.25 for 5 was a discount. And I think at the end of the year, I think Blackwood knew that if he went to free agency, that number began with a 6. And
that's probably true. I think there is something to be said for calling their shot like straight away. The reality is that they've been searching for a starting goaltender, and they're obviously we're confident enough in this deal to make the deal and to extend him immediately. And I think that there is a mental aspect, especially for goalies, of that team immediately committing to him and saying, "You're our starter for the next few years. We're going to give you everything that we need, that you need to succeed in this role or whatever." Dial in and, you're our guy going forward. You don't have to think about, are you going to be here in 3 months' time? You don't have to think about anything else or whatever. There is probably some, benefit to trying to immediately knowing kind of what the future is for you in that role.
I think it's kind of also what went wrong with Colorado post-Cup. One of the things that went wrong is that they didn't really, even though they signed Georgiev, they didn't really call their shot on that. Like, that was we're going to go with Georgiev because there's no real other options there. And you never got the feeling they were happy with the fact they had to do that. And then you saw what happened in the playoffs where Georgiev was not good. And you knew that they hadn't committed to what they were doing. At least now they've got to focus. Like, they know. Yeah. They know what's in net and they can move forward. Also, remember, Colorado's got a lot of contract conversations and interesting bits coming up, especially with certain players that are on IR that are worth a small fortune. So they've got a lot. Colorado's got a lot to sort out.
Yeah. Is Gabriel Landeskog ever going to come back? Will he ever play another game?
I don't know.
There's a lot of question marks.
That's a conversation we're going to. So let's go into the 2 New York Rangers moves because there's 3 moves that link. 2 of them, 1 trade and 1 contract link, and then there's another trade that moves. So let's go through the order. I'm going to go through them in order. So we're going to jump.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the Anaheim Ducks acquire Jakob Trouba from the New York Rangers for Urho Vakananen and a conditional 2025 4th-round pick. Now, the whole point of that was cap dump. Everyone knew the Rangers were trying to get out from under Jakob Trouba. There were a lot of people who were complaining about, they did Trouba dirty, but everyone knew this was coming. Trouba knew this was coming. They'd offered opportunities for Trouba to sort of almost call his own shot in the off season, and he just refused. And my point on that, and we talked about it at the time, was the Rangers gave him a shot to call where he wanted to have a say in it.
Yeah,
I mean,
fair enough. Obviously, he got given a contract that had trade protection. Yeah. He chose to use that. That's totally fine. That's not to say that he should have made another decision. But the reality of trade protection in the NHL is simply just that
you can get around
they're going to get around it one way or the other. Sometimes it is better to just exert that power to go where you want to go.
If I was Trouba, like at the end of the year, everybody knew that relationship was over. Everybody was aware of it, including Trouba. Like, I don't know what his end game was. I understand, again, you've got a contract, you don't want to move, and you shouldn't have to move. I get all of that. But in a practical reality NHL situation, if you are Trouba, what do you gain out of holding in a place that you don't want to be, knowing that they've got the ability eventually to just move you if they feel the need to? I think that he played it really badly, hoping that sympathy was going to work in a team that was owned by James Dolan. And James Dolan doesn't care about anybody. Like, not about the players, not about the fans, not about the teams. James Dolan doesn't care. And he puts people in positions who don't care because they're not there for sympathy. They're there to win. And we'll talk about how that's going for the Rangers this season. I would have moved Trouba on if I was them, but I would never have signed Trouba if I was them.
Yeah, this is the thing. When he was originally brought on board, I think it really took a few years before a lot of the New York fan base really caught up to the fact of, like, this guy isn't actually that good. You've given him a lot of money to just hit people in the head and get suspended once a year.
Can I just point out the other big problem with this is Chris Drury's fault. Not just for the bringing him in, but whenever all the criticism hit of Trouba, his answer was to make him captain. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll double down on this. And
like,
this is the guy that we want.
We are so stubborn that we're going to make Trouba captain. Adam Fox is right there. Like, he's right there. You want to make a good defenseman captain of your club? Adam Fox exists. No.
I think they just made it harder on themselves by doing it too, because maybe they could have moved on from him a year earlier if they didn't make him an important part of their leadership team.
I don't understand. Again, I don't understand any of the Trouba move. But so the Trouba move is the first part of this. Anaheim go and get Trouba because why wouldn't they? Like, what? Anaheim's got nothing to lose in this. Like, they get a veteran to come in and work with young players. That's fine. It's not a problem for Anaheim, who are trying to be bad still. Look, I say Anaheim are trying to be bad. I don't know what Anaheim are trying to be anymore.
I don't know that they necessarily are. I
don't think they're trying to be. I don't think they're trying to be good, but I don't think they're trying to be bad. I don't know what they want. Like, if you look at the Ducks roster, it is so weird. And like, it's a bizarre roster that nobody talks about, but they are weird as a roster. And
every start of the season, you kind of look at them and kind of go, oh yeah, there's a few things here where things could, break well for them if these players break out, if this, and I just feel like it just kind of never really happens for them. They just always end up kind of middling.
They've currently got 32 million in cap space. They've got 16 in projected. Like, seriously, they've got 16 million in space. I mean, I think the plan for the Ducks is going to end up being use that cap space at the deadline, but because I can't imagine that you'd hang on to it all. because especially since other teams around them don't necessarily have the space that they do. Like the Sharks, for example, who you'd expect to be in on trades, have only got 4 million in cap, probably projected towards that. The deadline cap space is 21 mil for the Sharks, but their projected going forward is not that great. I mean, so I don't understand. Like if I'm the Ducks, I'm weaponizing that, and that might be what that roster's for. But the other problem with the Ducks is that I feel like they're going to trade key pieces. I feel like they don't. We've had these conversations before. There are players on that team who are amazingly good, who I don't think the Ducks trust.
I just think that what it boils down to in the end is that their rebuild didn't really hit. Like, they had a few guys come in, where like, oh, this guy, Troy Cherry's, Trevor Zegras, all these guys, they're going to be our new core. They're going to, lead us. And they've been there for 5 to 7 years, and it just hasn't hit. Like it didn't all come together. And it kind of is now at the point where it's like, well, do we start rebuilding again? In which case, all of those guys are going to be in their 30s by the time we're good. So I guess we just burn it to the ground again. Like it just,
yeah. Look, and
there's a lot of teams that are like that.
But I think the other big problem, and again, not to make it a Sharks thing, but I'm going to again. I think the other big problem for Anaheim though is that like San Jose's rebuild is like in absolute hyperdrive. And the Ducks have had a head start, and we're like, well, we'll be the next big Kelly team to push forward again. We're going to do the big rebuild. We're doing it earlier than them, so we'll be back up faster. And the way it's going at the moment, the Sharks have got 3/4 of the way through like a really good build, and at the moment are the favourites to get the number 1 pick again. So, like, if that happens, I think the Ducks can possibly pack up and go home. But the main part of that Trouba trade is the next bit, which is Igor Shesterkin confirmed 8 years, $11.5 million. I think it's a great deal. You will not, we talked about this many times on the lead in, you will not hear me say this is a bad deal. You will not hear me go, they paid too much for Igor. As we will talk about a bit later, the entirety of the Rangers' plans for the last 4 seasons has been Igor Shesterkin is amazing. And that's what they're relying on, that Igor Shesterkin is amazing. He's earned that contract. Even if things then went badly down the line, he's earned that contract on the basis of everything he's done for that franchise up to this point. But I don't think...
to be honest, I was expecting him to have a better year. Like, basically, we talked about predictions earlier.
He's been injured.
That's true. I expected him to have, a much more kind of convincing, contract year season. He's still got exactly the contract that I was expecting. Like, this is, as I said at the time, he'll get like, the biggest, goalie deal, and it'll be a good deal. And that's the reality of what happened. He's probably the only one that's worth it. But this year, has been a blip in terms of like his overall career. And a lot of that is, the team also just hasn't been good, which is interesting.
We're gonna go through them, but the team's been horrific. Like the team has been absolutely horrific in front of him. Everything's been poor, and Igor's again. He's been out with upper bodies. He's been on IR briefly for bits. Like I think the wear and tear of being Igor Shesterkin this year has been a lot so far. He's been decent when he plays. That's the thing. He hasn't been brilliant, but he's been perfectly fine.
Yeah, if the team had been better, they would still be in a much better position. That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there's a lot. And again, we're going to go through the Rangers in a bit more detail. But I like that deal. I think it's a great deal. I think, I think if anything, he was really kind to the team and left some money on the table. Because I think he possibly even could have got. We did say he could have got the 12. And the third move the Rangers made, and this is interesting for me because I've always been, as you very much know, I'm a Capo Caco truther. And the Seattle Kraken acquire Capo Caco from the New York Rangers for Will Borgen, a 2025 third and a 2025 sixth. This is an interesting move. I feel like Seattle get something that they need, which is somebody who's possibly really good at offense. And so far in Seattle, he's actually been good. Will Borgen comes back, so you get young defense for the Rangers. I think this is a move that works for all parties. I think that Capo Caco not being in New York, it's a great thing for Capo Caco because I think he'll be a lot better not in New York. That I'll come back to a bit more on Kako and why I think he's moving when we talk about the Rangers in a bit more depth. But what do you think about the move? What do you think, especially about Borgen going back to New York?
Well, it's an interesting one in terms of those few young forwards on New York. That it was always a question of when are they going to break out? Who's going to be the one that becomes this kind of meets the potential that they were supposed to have. In terms
hard to do that when you change your style halfway through.
Yeah, that's the thing, and I think the reality is for as much as it looked like New York was going to have this their rebuild was super quick and it's ready and everyone's good to go, and there was a lot of pressure on those young guys to kind of step into a role and develop pretty quickly, and I don't know necessarily that worked out how they wanted for either guy or for any of their kind of young forwards, and Kako is a big part of that. He kind of, I would say, they were kind of hoping for more of a breakout that you've seen from some of the kind of similar aged forwards like Roslovic and all that kind of stuff, kind of a similar kind of draft class that are kind of now breaking out into big scoring roles and so forth, and it just kind of went, well, maybe it's not going to work out here. Maybe we've spoiled the pot here a little bit for Kako and moved on from him. I'm interested to see how he does in Seattle. I don't know that it's a great situation for him in terms of breaking out. Seattle is one of those weird teams where you can look at any of their lines and kind of go, is this the first line? Is this the second line? I don't know. Like they're such a flat team top to bottom without most kind of usually there's a much more kind of distinct difference between like the ice time that certain lines will get, and I don't know that he's going to end up in like a 18-minute a night role in Seattle anytime soon. He's probably going to be playing 13-14 minutes, and because of that may not kind of reach the the scoring potential in terms of the boxcar stats that people expect to see, but yeah, hopefully a change of pace, change of scenery is kind of what he needs to kind of reach the potential that people were expecting of him.
I mean, he's got 5 points in 9 games so far in Seattle. Which is, again, he had 14 in 30 in New York. So, I've very much always been a Kako truther, and I believe that he's better than what we've seen.
I mean, look, he's still 23. Like that's still the age that a lot of forwards come into the NHL. Very much could still have a a pretty kind of decent breakout long
and
term.
Also,
in terms of Borgen, I think I don't know. I'm not expecting a heap from 28-year-old Will Borgen at this point in his career. He may end up being a decent depth defenseman for the Rangers.
I think
not quite the same caliber of player.
I think what the Rangers are after is just it's cap control defensemen. Like they've just paid their goalie $11.5 million. They're looking for some cap control here, and I think that's sort of where their plans are going at the moment with some of this build. Now is that some of the depth players need to come off bigger deals and be on slightly smaller deals. The other thing I would look at just for me with the range, again from a Rangers perspective, and I keep saying it, but we are going to go into the Rangers a bit more depth shortly. But if I'm the Rangers, I'm still looking at a couple of those big contracts for big players and going, why do we have them when they're not producing anything close to what they should be? But we'll come back to that. St. Louis get Cam Fowler and a 4th from Anaheim for a 2nd-round pick. And I'm not even going to try his last name. You can do that one.
Biakabatuka apparently is how it's pronounced.
I've
heard it pronounced a couple of times. Otherwise, I don't think that I would necessarily.
Jeremy.
Apparently, he's related to some like football player or baseball player or something like that, who has the same last name, and people know it because of that. But I've never heard of it.
Yeah, not a chance. Grizzled veteran goes to St. Louis.
Yeah, look, he seems to be doing reasonably well in that role so far. He's gotten a little bit of power play time, but I'm not expecting Cam Fowler to turn into anything that he hasn't been previously. He's had plenty of opportunities for that kind of thing in Anaheim and been underwhelming there. I suspect that it's just another guy on that St. Louis blue line. Really, it's fine. Anaheim retained a little bit of salary, I think, in that trade. So, it's a useful kind of deal for St. Louis, and Anaheim obviously don't need him, so that's fine.
And then Colorado acquired Juuso Parssinen in a 2026 seventh from the Nashville Predators for Andre Pavel and a 2027 third. Sure.
Yeah, it's fine. Colorado honestly has been so ravaged with forward injuries that like he's been playing probably way up more up the lineup than he would have otherwise.
Literally, most of these things can be Colorado trade for body. Kind of what they're doing. And then Frank Vetrano, 3 years at 4.5 AAV, with $3 million per deferred to be paid out at $900,000 for 10 years, beginning in 2035. We are going to at some point.
The most interesting part of that.
I'm fascinated by the NHLPA and the NHL and dealings, and the league won't particularly like this for cap circumvention, but you think that the PA are never giving that up. So
yeah, this is an interesting one because I mean, it's obviously going to be a big point of contention at the next CBA.
That's cap circumvention. I
mean, it kind of is. So obviously, the reality is that they got him at a lower AAV than they would have otherwise because of this deference. The question for me is, I wonder in most of these deferred salary cases how beneficial it actually is for the player, because the plan here, and from what people reported on this, is that essentially, in 10 years' time, Frank Vetrano is going to be retired and he's going to be living somewhere that isn't California. So he is expecting to be in a more beneficial tax environment for the money that he's going to be receiving in 10 years' time. I've saw some commentary on this by Alan Walsh about how he's not convinced that this is actually a better financial situation for players who take this kind of deferred, salary. If you were to get that money up front, if you were to get that money earlier and invest it, you probably would be way better off, even at a very safe investment than doing something like this. Obviously, I don't think that he had the option to, have the money up front. It wasn't like it was like you could have the same money up front or you can have the same money in 10 years. This is obviously a trade-off, compared to, another year or something like that on the contract or whatever it was going to be. I can understand the benefit of having this kind of guaranteed salary in retirement. Like I think to me that makes a lot of sense in terms of like, most NHL players are out of the league by their early 30s. That's just the reality of, they've still got another 30 years before what most of us would consider traditional retirement age. They need to find a way to, make money after they retire. And depending on what they've invested, what kind of, money they've spent and so forth, that money can dry up quickly. We've seen that with a lot of players who, within a few years are doing commercials, trying their best to just kind of, go back to working a regular job or whatever when they maybe didn't even finish college or something like that because of their career, if that money goes away. So having, almost $1 million a year for 10 years, after you retire, that's I totally understand that. That's a, very promising kind of, thing to have on, that amongst everything else, that's a benefit. Whether or not it is actually the best, solution in terms of contract structure and all of that kind of stuff, whether or not it's helping anyone but the teams, I think is a big kind of question mark for me. I haven't seen a lot of these where it's anything more than just like kind of a small marginal benefit for the team.
Yeah, it's basically a way that they can. It also sells players, but it sells players on the idea they're being helped. I don't know how much they are. I don't think they are.
Yeah.
But it sells players on the idea of, we've got you at the end of your career. We're going to help you. We're going to help you. And look, other sports do it all the time, where they back end contracts and then they go, like, you've retired, and once you've retired, we'll pay you all this money. But I I don't know. I think there's got to be a lot of cap work done, but I don't know what the cap work looks like because everyone's got to agree on it. I don't think anybody involved in the cap agrees with what it should be. Two more things before we move into some of the other news we've got. There are two more exchanges we need to talk about. One in particular was a firing. So there was news coming out of Detroit that Derek Lalonde had been fired. That was then immediately rubbish. Which a day later was proven correct when he was fired and Todd McClellan was hired. Detroit, man. Detroit.
Yeah.
They're not good. They don't know what they're doing. And I wonder if we've talked about this a few times. How much damage is Detroit going to do to Steve Eisenman's reputation as a general manager? I think it's doing some damage now.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time, realistically. You know, it's certainly not as sterling as it used to be.
No, Todd McClellan will be serviceable. He won't change much, but he'll be serviceable. I think there's bigger problems there. We talked about Anaheim as a roster that doesn't know what it is. Detroit's got no chance. Like that.
Yeah.
You almost need to bring in, like if you were looking at this roster and you were looking at it, you'd almost go, Steve Eisenman's the man you should bring in to fix this roster, except Steve Eisenman built this roster. So that's the thing. This is the sort of job where you would look at it and go, you know who might be able to fix that? Steve Eisenman. But he did it. So I don't know who you bring in to fix it now. And they're so wedded to the idea of Eisenman. I don't know if they're going to fire him. Like, I don't. No,
he's got a lot of rope. Yeah,
I think he's got a job for life, basically. The other thing I want to mention before we move into some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about is obviously there's 2 more outdoor games been announced for next year. Both of them in Florida. Both of them are in Florida.
I did see someone joking that it was going to be like the roller hockey scene from Mighty Ducks 2 out in the. But like honestly, that would be so fun.
I look forward now to the news that the Chicago Blackhawks are relocating to Florida. I didn't realize until the other day that Chicago obviously has done more outdoor games than anybody else.
Yeah.
They've never won.
And they haven't won any of them. Yeah.
They've never won. I didn't realize that. Didn't think about it. I was
just trying to get them a win at an outdoor game.
The idea they've done more outdoor games than anyone else and they've never won one is hilarious. Like, why do you keep playing them?
Yeah.
Like, Mr. Wirtz, stop for a minute. Think about this logically. No, we're good. We're good.
No, let's just do it again. Run it back one more time. Run it back. Come on, we'll win this time.
So the World Juniors have happened, and let's talk about the most important thing. Team Canada's horrible, and they're reprehensible, and they're failures to their whole country. If you missed it, by the way, for anybody else who was actually trying to pay attention to the World Juniors, Team USA win again. They beat Finland in the gold medal game. Czechia got the bronze, and Sweden got 4th. But that doesn't matter because Canada's a disgrace.
Canada's the only thing
and what's happening with Canada? Because that's the only thing that matters with the World Juniors is Canada. Well,
it's funny because I think really over the last decade, we've really seen the kind of fall from like the golden pedestal of Canada in terms of not just their World Junior team, but, you know, their Olympic team and so forth. And, you know, there used to be this real kind of untouchable quality about like Canada was always going to be in the gold medal game in every single tournament. And it's just kind of, I think that the playing field has leveled a lot more, which is incredibly good for, everyone except for, people that are angry about it in Canada.
There's two things that can be true at the same time. First of all, the Canadian organization of their international hockey programs is atrocious. Absolutely terrible.
That is also true, yeah.
The coaching's horrible. All of that is true. But what I think gets missed out by all of the talking heads who are all Canadian, because let's face it, they're media-wise, they're the only country that cares about all of this, is they just talk about the fact, well, we've failed and that's why we're losing. No, everybody else is well and truly caught up. Like the US, everyone knows the US collegiate programs in particular, once US college sports get hold of the sport, you're in trouble because they're very good at this. And like the US system has come along in leaps and bounds. The funding has been massive. Finland and Czechia in particular, Finland have always been around there. Sweden have always been around there. Czechia have done such a good job at developing talent and developing young players. And I also wonder, and this is something that I just think is something that's not really spoken about a lot, how much is not having an NHL-based Team Canada at the Olympics helped everybody else to work out what the hell they're doing on an international scene, because they're not competing against a team that goes out there and just destroys you every night. Yeah. And so you've got time to build a program. You've got time to build some wins up. You've got time to learn what to do so that you're better. And I think that's actually kind of a really important point too, because like an NHL Team Canada playing against a really inexperienced Czechia team and going out there and crushing them would crush spirits, would sort of bring morale down. Why are we even bothering? They're getting better and getting better and getting better and learning that they can all compete. I think obviously still a NHL level Team Canada you would expect to win. But I think that in the juniors in particular, what you're seeing is these junior players are looking at the Canadians and going, actually, you're not that scary. You're not that intimidating.
Well, we can cut it. The thing is, apparently this particular World Juniors team for Canada, they left a lot. I mean, this is a commonality thing for Canada in general, because I really think they overthink that they're international teams a lot of the time. But apparently that they left a lot of talent on the table.
They left some of their best players at home.
Yeah, to try and build a team that they felt was the most, cohesive, the most kind of, built to succeed and have chemistry and all that kind of stuff. And they were garbage. They couldn't play together and it sucked. But I really think that, like, something that someone mentioned recently really kind of stood out to me as the way that they seem to build international teams is that they will just pick, like, some random, coach, especially for like the Olympic team or the professional level kind of thing. They will pick some NHL coach or whatever who happens to be good at the time, or happens to have a successful NHL team at the time, and kind of go, you're going to be Team Canada's general manager or whatever. You're going to put all this together, and we'll give you like 6 months or something to kind of pull this thing together. And realistically, they probably just should have a permanent program of like people that their role is permanently that they're the organization that every year is the general manager and the coach or whatever of the national team at this level, kind of thing. So and so that they're one person kind of watching through different levels of players all through the year, and already planning next year's team in advance. All this kind of, like, it seems like they feel like they can just kind of throw it all together in like a few months' time as like a side like hustle to running an NHL team. Or it's kind of it doesn't really seem like the best way to go about it.
It's really weird. So like Dave Cameron was the coach who doesn't actually coach at even a vaguely high level. He's a mid coach in the development leagues. Like he's coaching. I think he's the Ottawa 67's coach, and they're not particularly good. They don't particularly win any. And he's the guy they've tapped on the shoulder and gone, "You are coaching Team Canada." And what? In every other sport, when you've got youth development, you go out, as you just said, you get youth development coaches who are good at this. You get guys who are good at working with younger talent and bringing young talent through and are in the program and know. And then you set your program to develop the talent for the way you want to play going forward, and you work on that as a thing. Instead, what they tend to do here is, who do you know? Who's your friend? And how long have you been working in Canadian hockey? Well, you're the guy. And I think, again, you need to have people in charge of the program, as you said, who know what they're doing and who know how to get the best out of young players. Because if you look at, and again, we're sort of falling a little bit into the trap here, but we're not really, is the difference between the United States and Canada, for example, is the US go out and get the best collegiate coaches, the best guys who work with young talent all the way through and go, this is what we're doing with our system. This is the system. There is a US hockey system. There is a development program. It is in effect, and you know what you are doing at each phase. And there's a reason why, if you look at recent NHL drafts, consistently, America is producing guys at the top couple of draft picks rather than Canada producing them. Because there's a system. They know exactly what they're doing. They come into the league ready to go, and they know how to play against older players. Whereas you've still got this thing in Canada where there is a feeling that we're Canadian, and that will carry us in a large respect. And it's not true anymore. And everyone else knows how to develop talent, and Canada just goes, well, you're Canadian, that's
and we've got these traditions of playing in these particular leagues and all this kind of stuff, and that's worked in the past and it'll continue to be fine.
So, but I mean, I wasn't vaguely surprised that Team USA won the juniors. Again, their system's great. And again, I don't think that it's because Canada sucked in terms of the way they organised it or did it. I think that everyone else is caught up, and Canada just hasn't thought about that and doesn't play. They don't play the same way that everyone else plays. Everyone else plays to win. They play like they owed it, and I think that's kind of
There is certainly a mental aspect to that. I think for sure that as a nation, I think they're still kind of getting over the fact that they're no longer the top dog.
So let's quickly go into a few things. First of all, thanks, Brad Marchand, for giving us something to talk about this morning. So there was a tweet. There was actually a segment on a radio show in Boston for WI, which was basically talking about the problems in Boston and suggesting that David Pastrnak is the problem, and suggesting that part of the issue is that Pastrnak has told everybody that he doesn't want to play with Brad Marchand because Brad Marchand is all over him and is really tough on him. So Pastrnak said, I don't want to play with Brad Marchand. Brad Marchand responded. It's an amazing quote. Like, it's very, there's a couple of things that are interesting, but the quotes itself are not anything.
I mean, Marchand is very articulate. I think that honestly, he just kind of lays it out pretty calmly, and just being like, this is just totally made up. Like, we're best of friends. We can really get along. This is just, this guy just totally made something up completely out of thin air.
Now, you can basically, as of now, anything this guy says from here on in, you can take as absolutely factually inaccurate because he's made it up. But the biggest part about it for me wasn't even what Marchand said, wasn't what the other guy said about Pastrnak. It was the fact that the Boston Bruins tweeted it out.
Yeah.
The official account.
There was a series of different kind of interviews that they tweeted out at the same time, but obviously this was the one that that stood out. I think that Marchand is honestly just incredibly refreshing as a person speaking to the media, because he historically has done this a lot of times where he's just made either a fun, playful jab at another team or a player or something like that when he's been asked about it, or something he's actually given people something to talk about in the media, when in a fun kind of way, or is just honest and open about stuff that players try to talk around. I think that honestly, that is probably one of maybe the most surprising things that people probably haven't actually heard Marchand speak. He's very clear and honestly gives very good content in interviews.
And the guy who came out and the guy who said it from a show called Jones and Keefe. And the guy who said it then came out, and his only response was, the speed at which he came out and said that wasn't true, and the way he said that makes me feel like he's defending and hiding something. It's like, you're in trouble, dude. Just back down, maybe go, my information was wrong, or I even say that maybe there was a bit of discontent, but possibly not to the level that I'd been told. Because you can probably get away with the fact they've had an argument, because they probably have had an argument at some point. They're professional sports people, and they've probably got on each other's nerves all the time, especially while they're not playing well. But I think the level to which he because Brad Marchand would tell you, he wouldn't turn around and go, oh, no, we're fine, when they weren't. Now, Brad Marchand would come out and go, he's been a pain in the ass. That's Brad. That's what he'd do. And also, everybody got the greatest present we could have got for Christmas, which was Matt Rempe got suspended for 8 games for boarding and elbowing Miro Heiskanen.
The most interesting thing that's come out of this was that him talking to the media and saying that he got like sat down by the Department of Player Safety. I think maybe he said who it was. I think it might have been oh god, I can't blank on his name. What's his name? Violent Gentleman guy.
Oh yeah. I can see him. I can see his face.
Yeah. I can see the mustache and everything. It'll come to me in a minute. But they apparently sent him down and like played him clips of being like, this is a good hit, this is a bad hit. Like you're teaching a toddler like how to Paros, yeah. Went through like this kind of meeting with him about like what you're allowed to do and what you're not. Honestly, by the time you get to the NHL level, you should fucking know what kind of hits
you shouldn't have to have that explained by now.
This shouldn't have to be explained to you. Like,
I do miss. Look, I know we say this every.
This guy shouldn't be here.
I know we say this every time, but I just really miss the "I'm Brendan Shanahan" videos. I want him to leave the Leafs. I also want him to leave the Leafs because I still prefer the Will Arnett, I'm Brendan Shanahan and I drop the puck. Let's get into the milestones quickly. So Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin have had a busy couple of weeks. Crosby's passed Bergeron for the most face-off wins of all time.
This is a bit deceptive because they did only start keeping the stat in 1997.
To be fair, most of the face-offs before that began with dropping the puck and punching someone in the face, so we're all good.
That is probably also true, yeah.
So he also passed Joe Sakic for 9th all-time on the points list. He also passed Mario for the most assists in Penguins history. He's having a good season. He's playing really well.
It's interesting. This kind of we've really kind of hit this period of these particular kind of era of players. How passing all of these particular milestones and where they're going to kind of end up in the echelon of of greats and Hall of Famers and so forth. Every week it's like he's passed this guy, I think that he is about 80 off, I think, the next person in that all-time points list. So it's probably not going to be until like next season that he goes past anyone else. But there's a few guys clumped together, and he could very easily by the end of his career end up top 5.
Yeah, 100%. And again, the way he's playing, he's not showing the slowdown signs. I think he's playing. Yeah, really well.
It's interesting because like there's a bunch of guys at about like I think he's now about like 1642 or something like that in terms of points. There's a bunch of guys in like the 1700.
Yeah, there's a really narrow band.
Like the 1700, and then it's like Yager 1900, and then it's like Gretzky at like 2600 or something. Yep. Like
it's ridiculous. Which
he's not getting to, obviously.
Now the more important one though. And this is the one that we've been keeping tabs on. And I think one of my 3 predictions this year was that he does it. Ovi, 872, 23 more to pass Gretzky for all time. His pace has been crazy, even while injured. His pace has been insane.
Like, obviously, the Caps have been good this year, which is surprising. Everything's just kind of hit. Everything's kind of fallen in place for them. And they've been like, legitimately good, even while Ovi's been out. Like Ovi went out for like a month, and the Caps just kept rolling in his absence, despite him, scoring at this insane like 62 goal pace, which is the second best of his career since he was 20 years old.
I think he's getting there. I think he's getting there.
He might not score 30 in the next 40 games, but he might still just kind of get that 23 that he needs. I think he'll get it. I think he gets over the line. I think he'll get it before the end of the season. Yeah, I think if he's within single digits in the last 5 game, look out. He'll go absolutely mental. Now let's get into just some general conversations. Now let's start with the one I've been threatening the whole way through, which is what the hell is going on in New York? Now, first of all, I put my little subheading on my name is predictions are my thing because I told everybody that I thought the Rangers would suck this year. And ding, 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 ding. Now, yeah, I was like, look, I'm happy to be wrong. Really I don't particularly like them, but I did pick them to be good. And I'm a bit shocked about that. I think honestly, like the thing that seems to happen to me is that I will expect teams to be bad because I'll look at them on paper and kind of go, Yeah, they shouldn't be good. And it's been honestly, New York and Boston have been like that for like the last few years, where they just kept being good despite me kind of going, I don't understand why they're good. And it's kind of fallen apart for both teams this year to some degree.
And I called that. I said they'd both fall apart.
Yeah.
We'll ignore my Montreal prediction. But
yeah, finally, like years after years, I'm like, oh, finally, all right, okay. I guess I'll just accept that they're good despite me not understanding it, and then that's the immediate time where they go, no, we're shit now.
So I think, and look, when we get to Boston, it's a bit similar. But I think the big thing in New York is a little bit like what happened in Boston. We can sort of discuss both of them at the same time a little bit, because I think what happened in Boston is kind of a slightly varied version of what's happening in New York. But we'll talk about New York first, because New York should be a lot better than they are.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And I alluded to this before when we talked about Capo Caco before. I sort of alluded to the part of the problem for me, which is this was a roster with young players built by a general manager with an ethos of a general manager and a coaching style that was going to be one thing. And then Dolan woke up in the morning and chose violence, sacked everybody involved with that style, and brought in grizzled coaches to go and take a team that was not designed to play that style of hockey and make them play that style of hockey, and then wonder why Lafreniere and Capo Caco and all of these guys were not performing to the level they should be when you put, Gerard Gallant behind the bench. Why aren't these fast, pacey scoring players playing brilliantly with a guy who likes forechecking? I don't understand what's going on here. And then Drury's trades have been bizarre. The way that Drury makes moves, I don't think that Chris Drury has a say, really. It feels like James Dolan rings down and goes, I want a guy who punches someone. And Matt Rempe happens. And it's just the roster construction.
I mean, and Rempe isn't even the first of that ilk.
No.
There are examples of that, all the way through. Like
when we talked about it, when I talked about it at the start of the year as to why I thought the Rangers were not going to be great, if you remember, my whole point was their roster's not good in terms of there's no depth, there's no scoring. They're reliant on Igor Shesterkin being amazing, Artemi Panarin being unbelievably brilliant. But there's nobody down the middle. The question I asked my brother yesterday, he's a massive Rangers fan. The question I asked my brother was, are you comfortable, and I said this at the start of the season, are you comfortable if Mika Zibanejad is your first-line center? Right. Do you think a Stanley Cup winning team has Mika Zibanejad playing first-line center? Because I don't.
And this is assuming, him at a level that he was playing previously too. He's obviously had a massive drop-off in the last year or so.
Yeah. And that was my question. And he was like, no, if he can play at the level. I'm like, I don't see this lineup being built. Like down the middle, you've got Zibanejad, Trocheck, who's great, obviously, but can't carry a team as a first liner, and that's not his job.
He's ostensibly a second line center.
Yeah. Philip Hedl, who's, cool, second, third, great, fantastic. Sam Carrick. Like, they don't have a first line center. They've got like 3 seconds, but they don't have a first line center. So you're relying on Artemi Panarin to drive your play, but who's putting the puck in the net? So you don't have anyone to put.
I wonder, if we turn back time a couple of years in terms of an alternate version of history. I wonder what this team looks like if they'd been the one who took a swing on like a Jack Eichel and let him get this surgery and come back and
I look at the Rangers, and my problem with this Rangers lineup is that it's a team that has so much ability and so much potential in terms of the bones that were left. And they've picked it to pieces. There's been talk that teams have been told, if you make us the right offer, Adam Fox is available, which is ridiculous and should not be an option under any circumstances for any team. But
I don't know whether it's true or not, but I did hear that they offered Zibanejad for JT Miller.
Well, so my understanding of that is that it was the initial conversation was they made that offer. I did say to my brother yesterday as well, my first other question to him, apart from the Zibanejad, before we got to Zibanejad, my question was, how much exactly are the Rangers going to overpay for JT Miller? Because they're going to. That's coming.
Yeah.
We all know it's going to happen. What are they going to send for JT Miller, and how much of an overpay is it going to be? Because they're going to do it. They're going to get JT Miller because they think that's going to solve all of their problems. And I don't know.
Previously have JT Miller? Was
Yes.
that just
Yes.
Lightning? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was one of the players who went from the Rangers to the Lightning at one point.
Yeah.
In time.
Yeah. So they're going to go and get JT Miller because they think that will fix their problems. They're going to overpay for JT Miller. They're going to give something really good up for Miller. If I'm Vancouver, I'm just open. Okay, let's start going down your list. I want this. I want this. I want this. Because everyone's in job saving mode right now in New York. I just don't understand. There's no plan anymore. The roster is stripped bare. All of the things they had that were really going to be big assets for them, they've done so much damage to the assets. Like Ryan Lindgren's a UFA at the end of the year and not a chance. Absolutely not a chance. I think Lindgren will probably get moved before the end of the year. I think they'll probably move Riley Smith on. I think Philip Hedl has no protections whatsoever, so look out for Philip Hedl going the other way somewhere, possibly to Vancouver. I don't understand what the Rangers' plans are, apart from Igor will stop pucks. And it hasn't worked out that way this year. I will maintain Artemi Panarin is something this team can't afford. I think that, again, he's a good player for circumstances and situations, not for this one. And I think that you're blowing cap on a player that isn't going to do what you need and turns up sparingly.
My theory with the Rangers has always been that like they kind of succeeded accidentally in terms of like their rebuild, in terms of they released that letter to the newspaper like we're going to be it's some hard times going to be coming, we're going to be rebuilding, we're going to be bad for a while, and then within 12 months they managed to land the biggest free agent on the market in terms of Panarin. Everything kind of just fell into place. They got a couple of high picks and it turned into a relatively competitive team, but maybe not quite there. Like, they got the pieces that they need. They had the hard to get pieces in terms of like, they had this high player that signed for them. They had a franchise defenseman and a franchise goalie. They maybe didn't have that franchise center that, we've been kind of talking about for years, but that seemed like that could have been something that they could maybe have found a way to, if they turned some of those like first overall picks or whatever into a franchise center, I wonder if they would have actually kind of really hit into.
I mean, knowing, as you said before, and I think it's a really interesting what if. When the Rangers had all of those young assets that, they've now got rid of for peanuts on the dollar, right? If they traded those into Eichel like they talked about,
yeah,
I think this roster looks very different because you've got a first-line center. But, yeah, the other thing I did mention yesterday when I was talking about this was at the end of the year, if Toronto have not offered Marner the contract, are the New York Rangers the sort of team that's going to throw a max contract at Mitch Marner?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, they're not done. I don't think that we're signing their death warrant that they can't get better or anything. But I wonder if they just called it too early, that they were done too early, and then
I think
like, we're fine, we're good. We're going to be competing. We're going to we made the cup final. We're good.
I still think they need to make a general manager switch, and they need to get someone who knows what they're doing in roster construction, because Drury doesn't know what he's doing. Like, I think he's proven that he doesn't know what he's doing now. And, Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about Boston, because I want to get them out of the way. Boston's problem seems very simple. Like, everyone ignored the fact, when I said that Boston would finally be bad this year, everyone ignored the fact that they botched their goalie situation extremely badly. And that had been the thing that was holding the Bruins up. So the Bruins were being held up by the fact that, unlike every other team in the league, the Bruins had 2 starting goalies. And so they could just rotate them night after night after night, and the goalie performance was consistent. And I think why you traded one goalie and then negotiated the contract with the other one is ridiculous. I think you had leverage where you could have said to them, all right, we're going to do your contracts now, but whoever signs first is the one we're definitely keeping. And the other one's out of here. And we're just going to send you where we want to send you. Instead, you moved your leverage and then turned around and went, so Jeremy, let's do a contract. And he's like, well, that's good, but you need me now.
Yeah.
So my number is.
I have all the leverage.
Yeah. What are you going to do? Start a former goaltender for the Columbus Blue Jackets? No, you're not. You're not going to do that. So Boston basically did nothing to their roster to make it better. Nothing in depth. Didn't really add a hell of a lot of anything, and got rid of their strength. What did you think was going to happen? Like, this is exactly what was going to happen. You can't, like, the only thing that was papering over the cracks was that you had goaltending every night that no other team in the league had. And just
obviously, I think that honestly made them, gave them this false sense of security that they were good. Like, they honestly got to like 2 seasons of, this great goaltending tandem that kind of bolstered them in ways that they really probably shouldn't have. While their, skating roster got consistently worse year over year.
Yep.
They really kind of just had these extra opportunities that they probably didn't necessarily by the means of everything, kind of how it should have played out. They probably didn't deserve. They even got that one bonus extra run with Bergeron and.
Yep.
And what's his name? Krejci coming back.
Yeah.
Like, they even got like this miraculous like extra year out of them at a bargain basement thing. And it's like, all right, well then everything's done after that. And then it's just like, oh, okay, well they're gonna become bad now. And then they're like, oh no, actually we're just gonna have the best goalie tandem in the year in the league for a year and then do nothing with it.
So interestingly for me, I think that Boston and Toronto are the inverses of each other. I think that Toronto placed too much stock in what happened in the playoffs and ignored the regular season completely. I think Boston put too much stock in what happened in the regular season and ignored the playoffs completely. And I think that it's really interesting to watch these two teams take inverse approaches to the same thing. Is that Boston would be brilliant in the regular season and go, this is why we're great. And then they get into the playoffs and obviously, usually meet Toronto, so that helps. And then, but in the last couple of years, it was like, okay, that was a bit weak. That's going to be the problem. No. We're great. Look at our regular season form. We're amazing. Whereas Toronto look at it and go, we're brilliant in the regular. Who cares about that? We're out the first round of the playoffs. That's ridiculous. We're terrible. Balance, guys. Just look at your season overall and balance it. Make your adjustments accordingly. And I think that both teams have put too much stock in either end of the answer. And yeah, it's weird. Like Boston should have seen this coming. The fact that you've got Fire Waddell chants going around, it's incredible.
It's interesting. Like I'm curious to see kind of what their trajectory is over the next year or two because, they kept rolling as if they were going to be competitive. And I think that they had a lot shakier kind of foundation than a lot of other teams that people have been saying for years had done. You look at like the players that have been, still being good, but like on, not so competitive teams over the last few years in terms of like, Washington, Pittsburgh, a lot of other kind of, aging cores that, like the Bruins have been, an aging core of an aging core for a long time. And most of those guys are gone now. What we've got left basically is 36-year-old Brad Marchand, 28-year-old David Pastrnak. After that, it's kind of like, well, the rest of that core, like, Raska's retired, Bergeron's retired, Krejci's retired.
What I'm also really interested by...
I don't know if McAvoy is good enough to be considered in that kind of, echelon of core and everything like that. Like, that's kind of everything that they have left. Everyone else on their roster is, probably couldn't compete with the low. If you took away Marchand and Pasternak out of this roster, the rest of these guys probably couldn't beat the Sharks.
And the solution, well, we're good. The solution to their centre depth problem was to go out and get Elias Lindholm, which is a stupid answer to the question of what are you doing at centre depth, because I just talked about the Rangers don't have a first-line centre. On what planet is Elias Lindholm your 1C? Like, if
the planet from 6 years ago is what.
No, but even when you go through those numbers, his numbers are not good. Like, his career
playing with Gaudreau in Calgary, like that's that back then he was
he had two good seasons in Calgary, I'd argue. He has the 2018-2019 where he gets 78 in 81, and he gets 82 in 82 in 2021-2022.
But I mean, outside of that, there were no other. Yeah, but there were no other options. Like, they don't have any assets to trade for a legitimate first line center. They had free agency, and he was the guy in free agency. And they were just hoping that they could continue to roll with what they had.
And for $7.75 million as a first line center, he has 20 in 44.
Yeah,
that's horrific. 7 goals. Like, that is absolute. How do you only have 13 assists with David Pasternak? Like, that's atrocious performance. So Boston.
Speaking of Bergeron, not Bergeron. So speaking of Brad Marchand, he's on an expiring contract this year. Do you think that he extends in Boston?
I think he will, because I think he's loyal to a fault. I don't think he should.
He's certainly not the player that he used to be, but
I think there are funny outcomes for that.
Yeah, he is the captain at this point in time. He probably will. The same money is on.
He will, but how long is it going to be until you get a story coming out of Toronto where Toronto are making a massive offer to Brad Marchand? Because it's going to happen if they don't get him tied down.
Interesting if he found started just touring around teams trying to go for one more cup.
If Boston don't get him tied down to a deal, watch the Toronto media go mental on this idea of this feeding frenzy of Mitch who, get him out of town. Brad Marchand is the way to win a cup. Speaking of them, we'll get them out of the way because we'll finish on the really positive note. Should Toronto start planning the parade? Because if you listen to the Toronto media, they forget what happens at the end of the season every year and have decided that Craig Berube is the second coming, and that this team is amazing and they're brilliant and they're just resilient and they're tough and they're everything. And I literally heard Adam Wilde, Steve Dangle, and Jesse Blake say out loud, Ryan Reeves is great for this team, which means everybody in that city is drinking Kool-Aid and thinking that Toronto are the greatest team in the history of the NHL. Now, I understand why they're saying this, because they did win a bunch of games without Austin Matthews. Good for them. Mitch Marner is playing really well. Good for them. Doesn't matter. None of this matters. And I know I just said they don't put enough focus on we're really good in the regular season. None of this matters because they're going to get into the playoffs. We all know that. Yeah. It's what happens in the playoffs that becomes important in Toronto. And it's about what happens to those players. And also, again, I mentioned him before, Marner's on an expiring deal. Tavares is on an expiring deal. Now, I expect Tavares to re-sign for a lower amount of money. That's fine. Mitch Marner's on an expiring deal heading into a playoff series, which is going to be the most important for Toronto in a very long time. And the Toronto media are going to be ready to run him out of town on a rail if he doesn't perform. I don't think any of this currently matters for Toronto. I don't. I just don't think it matters.
That's honestly been the reality for them for the last 5 years. If everyone's just watching in horror as they see, their playoff berth get confirmed and wait for the inevitable, what happens in the playoffs? That's just the reality of.
And I don't think. And the other thing is too, I don't think Berube's done much different. I don't think this is a Berube coach team that's suddenly getting over a hump that Sheldon Keefe couldn't get over. I think he's doing exactly what happens normally. I think this is exactly what Toronto do every year. I think that the winning without Matthews has been great, but I also think that there's a lot of it's the weakest Atlantic we've seen in a very long time.
It's the weakest East, honestly. The whole East,
and
this
is
bad.
You won't hear that conversation coming out because again, Toronto's doing well, so you won't hear the conversation.
The class of the East right now is Toronto and Washington.
And I will say right now, because my other prediction that I made at the start of the year was about the Golden Knights being the best team in hockey. I think right now, and I know that Vegas lost 4-0 the other day to the Islanders, but everyone has one of those games. I think if you play the Golden Knights versus anybody in that Atlantic right now in a playoff series, they absolutely smash them into tiny pieces. I don't think it's a close game. I don't like the Oilers as we know as a team. I don't like their construction. I think the Oilers would run right through anyone in that Atlantic. I just think that the Atlantic is weak. And I think that the Leafs are winning a very soft division right now. And we'll see.
Look, if you look at the power players of the Atlantic, Florida, have been good at times, have been pretty, average looking at several times. They've been okay. They haven't been, obviously defending, cup champions good. They've been, good enough a lot of the time. Tampa have had, some pretty big flaws. They've looked pretty average a lot of the time. And you look, the whole Metro has been pretty bad. Honestly, the fact that the Caps have been, we said before the Caps have been good, but I still don't know whether I trust them to, win like a playoff series or anything.
I think that the East is, compared to the West at the moment, the West is, and we're going to talk about the West to finish off, but I think the East is very soft right now. I think the West has got some very good teams playing right now. Interestingly enough, for example, in the Pacific, like the Golden Knights and the Oilers have both played 41, and the Golden Knights are on 59 points, so they're out. They've got a gap over the Oilers right now. The Kings are 3 games behind, obviously because of what's happening in LA at the moment. There's no hockey happening in LA. But the Kings are on 51 points, 3 games back. So the Kings have been good this year. Like the Kings, when they catch up, should jump the Oilers at the very least. And obviously then when you go to the Central, the Jets have been really good, but that's largely been because they've had a goaltender who is probably playing at almost.
Yeah, and they had a red hot start, and they basically just kind of come back down to being good.
Yeah, but they've got a goal again. They've got a goalie who's in the MVP conversation right now.
Yeah, yes, that is a big one.
The Stars have suddenly worked out how to play hockey after being terrible and nearly fulfilling my prediction of getting rid of Peter DeBoer. Then suddenly they worked out how to play hockey and they've won 6 in a row. But for me, it's all about the Wild, because the Minnesota Wild, who are playing this season cap-wise with one arm tied behind their back, have been absolutely sensational.
And Kaprizov's injured and has been for a while.
Kaprizov's out. They're second. They're behind the Jets by 2 points. But the reason why, and I'm Jets fans, you need to talk about it. Well, the Jets have been good. You've had a great lot of goaltending right now. You're doing pretty well. But it is about the Wild because, again, have we seen a team this far in cap hell do this in a season where they realistically should be positioning for next year when their cap space comes back? And this is the thing that I think everybody needs to remember about what's happening in this season when we talk about the cap space. When you look at next season for the Minnesota Wild, they get their salary cap back. Like, this is the last year where they're losing all of it at the moment. Next year, they come back and they've got cap space. They've got 14 million next year back. They've got none. They're negative at the moment.
They don't just blow it all on something stupid. So it's honestly there's so much potential in big openings of cap space. We've seen this, so many times with teams being like, oh, they're going into the off season with 10 million to spend, 12 million to spend, 15 million to spend, and then you come out of the off season and they've just paid 4 middling guys $6 million contracts. Why? Why the fuck did you do that? You could have done anything. You could have been you had all the buying power in the world to get the best player available, and even if you had to overpay them slightly, and you're like, no, we need 3 third pairing defensemen.
I feel like this time we're in a better position. They're in a better position in terms of the general manager was brought in to fix the cap problems and deal with the fact they were going to be cap smashed. And I feel like if they've got this roster held together, they can add one piece to it and re-sign a bunch of other key pieces and use that cap space effectively to hold what they've got. And then the following season, they've got even more cap coming back. So I don't think you're going to see them. I hope not, because if they do, it's dumb. But I don't think you're going to see them overspend the way they have previously, because they've just got themselves out of cap hell. But I think the performance this year for the Wild, the reason why I think we need to shout that out to finish it off is because it's an amazing performance in a situation where, like, Toronto and all these other teams are complaining that they're so close to the cap, but they've got a full roster. And again, Minnesota started underwater. They started cap-wise underwater with all the LTIR, with all the hits they took for the cap buyouts. And what they've been able to do is nothing short of amazing. And when Kaprizov comes back, is consistently back and not injured, that's a dangerous team.
To be clear, I think about $7 million of that is going towards Brock Faber's extension already. So we aren't talking about the full 14 mil. But look, I think that they have the space to. I don't know who's going to be available as a UFA or anything by the end of the year. But yeah, I don't know. They could make a splash. They could be a real contender next year.
I think they've got the ability and they've got the potential to be able to use the space effectively. So and look, that just gives them options as opposed to like right now where they did not have options. And for a team that didn't have options for what they've done brilliantly. All right, so that's going to do us for this week. Now we will be back. ? So
we'll see how we go over the next few weeks. Maybe I don't know what my availability is going to be like. But
I'll probably do something small in the meantime anyway.
Yeah, maybe do something with a guest or something like that.
We didn't mention the Four Nations because, to be blunt, I couldn't care. I don't care. I don't care. It's not anything. It's not massively important. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining us as always. Please share it if you like it, and we will catch you all later.
See ya.